LeBron James once said, "I think the mental side of the game is way over 50%, probably around 80%. Decades long before LeBron ever stepped on a basketball court, baseball Chicago Cubs hired Coleman Griffith, noted as the first ever sports psychologist. Griffith's work in the late 1930s was pioneering, and countless legendary athletes across many different sports have since said how mindset is the number one most important thing in order to reach the top of their game. So why, since Griffith, did it take over 80 years until one of the major sports leagues made it mandatory for all franchises to hire a behavioural health specialist? Why is it still a newsworthy story to hear of a major star see a sports psychologist? Why is it not normalised in the same way as athletes consulting with nutritionists, strength and conditioning coaches, and now even data analysts? This contradiction of countless athletes and coaches claiming that psychology is the most important thing, but they're not making any effort to actually integrate it into how they approach their sport, is something worth questioning. And the main question that needs to be asked then is, why is sports psychology not working? Reason 1, the stigma of psychology. Despite society becoming more open with discussing mental health, when we hear the word psychology, it's still common to think of negative images. Like the patient lying down on a couch, pouring out their heart and soul to some old guy who doesn't really say anything. And those stigmas carry over into professional sport, an area where people are supposed to be seen as tough as possible and showing no sign of weakness. Despite this changing with labels of bravery for the likes of Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka speaking about their mental health, thousands of professional athletes are convinced by the idea that seeking support for your mindset, your feelings, or your emotional state is a weakness. And even if you are struggling, the last person you're going to want to chat to is some random psychologist. Instead, you're far more likely to go to your coach. The very best coaches are labelled by their athletes as being like a father or mother figure, and sometimes their success is arguably more down to their man management than it is their tactics or playing methods. And even if you then have a coach who actively encourages speaking to the team psychologist, another problem often emerges: confusion in support. Because of the stigma just mentioned, there's still the belief that you see the sports psychologist when something is going wrong, and it's not always clear about what kind of issues to go to them with. But sports psychologists are not clinical psychologists or psychiatrists. They're not there to diagnose mental health disorders or assign prescriptions or treatments. They're often there to facilitate and work on performance-related factors such as pre-game anxiety, confidence issues, or team bonding. But it can often be the case for the athlete that their performance is being impacted by something negative in their personal life. Things like a sick family member, relationship problems, or homesickness. All things that can actually be a precursor to developing a mental health disorder. And a lot of these personal issues may be things that the sports psychologist is just not actually adequately trained or experienced in being able to offer assistance with. And so they may have to refer the athlete onto another mental health practitioner. And so for the athlete, that puts them in a really awkward, difficult position where they come to someone who they believe could have helped them, but then they've just been passed over to someone else. And then word of mouth then travels in the dressing room. Little snippets of an athlete's negative experience means they may advise teammates to not even bother going to see the sports psychologist. So instead, it often remains that coaches are the go-to for athletes looking for support. And it might just be that talking to this person that athletes place so much trust in is more than enough. And the last thing I think that makes sports psychology seem like it's not working is that it often requires a lot of effort for very uncertain gains. You see, when it comes to other integrated specialisms in sport, it's often very clear to see how they can have an actual impact, and that they're often quite easy things to tag on to an athlete's pre-existing routines. The nutritionist can say, eat this and you'll feel more energized and recover quicker. Or the strength and conditioning coach can say, do this exercise and you'll be able to run faster, throw further, or jump higher. And these things are somewhat low effort, but pretty much guarantee high rewards and benefits. But for the sports psychologist, they have to say, do this journaling exercise for 5 days a week and you might feel less anxious come game day. Or it may be asking athletes to practice visualizing all potential moments in an upcoming match, or spend hours planning out a series of different self-talk mantras for different scenarios. All of these require a lot more effort, particularly for the mind, and especially written activities. These can instantly just lead athletes becoming completely disengaged. Essentially asking athletes to do homework that may or may not improve their game, that's a big ask. Everyone's brain is a lot more different than bodies. You can do a lot of the same things to different bodies and get very similar results, like giving people the same food or same exercises and seeing how that has similar effects on their physiology. But you can do the same thing to many different brains and get completely different results. One person may become a lot more confident and less stressed from journaling, whereas another person may become even more stressed out. So the result of many psychological interventions are just not reliable or predictable. That's the sad, honest truth. Can they work? Absolutely, but it just requires a lot more risk. The science of outcomes in sports psychology is currently not as strong as outcomes in other areas like nutrition or strength and conditioning. It will always be in some cases a bit of trial and error, and that just doesn't fall in line with how competitive professional sports operate. So it sounds like I'm slamming sports psychology, but I'm just being honest with some of the things that I think has meant that the field hasn't developed and become as integrated into professional sports. It currently still exists as a nice to have rather than a must have. So what can be done to change this? Well, I'm not to say because I'm not a professional athlete, sports coach, or even a sports psychologist myself. But I think anything aimed at decreasing the stigma of psychology is a start. Coaches and leaders in sport need to set this example because many old school coaches are guilty of not embracing this potentially helpful resource. And it's also key that clarification is given surrounding what sports psychology actually entails. Some feel dropping the term psychology altogether can be helpful and instead label sports psychologists as mental performance coaches, practitioners, or advisors, which may also help with decreasing stigma. And finally, the field needs to develop better interventions and practical tools, things that are not that difficult to implement, but can have a real good positive impact for all athletes in terms of their mindset and emotional state. Anyway, what do you think? If you're an athlete, a coach, or work in sports psychology yourself, then let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.